Next we're going to look at Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. Originally published in 1943, the edition I read is part of a new series of English translations being published by New Directions. This we're going to compare with Daydream Nation by Sonic Youth. The band's fifth studio album, originally released in 1988, has gained sort of a legendary status in the band's discography for being their last studio album prior to their major label signing. As a double album, it's also one of their longest efforts at over 70 minutes, which makes it quite an interesting contrast with Near to the Wild Heart, which packs quite an artistic wallop despite being just a slim little thing. Unbeknownst to me when I first began the novel, this was actually Lispector's first published work at only age 23. And holy shit, how a 23-year-old would have the breadth of perspective and the genuine talent to pull off something this fierce, introspective, and relentlessly varied is entirely beyond my power to imagine. Apparently it had a similar impact on the Portuguese-speaking reading public, as it effectively catapulted her into the public eye and earned her that year's prestigious Grata Aranja Prize. At its core, this is a stream of consciousness novel, conveyed mostly from the perspective of our protagonist, Joanna, a woman so fiercely and intensely fascinated by her own ways of perceiving the world that she seems to completely unnerve a majority of the people she comes in contact with. We're shown some of the more traumatic episodes from her youth, as well as a period from her young adulthood, where she gradually builds up the conviction needed to leave behind the safe but stifling life she's built up with her husband. Joanna is one of those narrators you just sort of quietly marvel at, almost in awe as these volcanic eruptions of thought and philosophy just come bursting forth. Then you start to realize it's not just the content of the thoughts themselves that are holding you in thrall. It's her process of using her primal powers of analysis to endlessly dissect what she's thinking about, why she's thinking that way, completely opposite perspective she might just as easily have picked up. That creates this almost Russian doll-like quality to the prose. Thoughts inside of thoughts inside of thoughts inside of thoughts. This sudden awareness I had of Lispector's creative process actually mirrored for me one of my first experiences listening to Daydream Nation, which at first blush seemed just sort of like a solid rock album with maybe some longer, more experimental instrumental passages thrown in. Then I actually heard the thing on headphones and became attuned to the fact that even in the portions of the songs that felt the most structured, most focused on delivering pleasure and that cathartic feeling of rock and roll rebellion, there were all these subtle flourishes and improvisations going on in the deeper structure of the song. As a familiar chorus kicks in, you'll hear all sorts of strange, deliberate distortions lying just underneath the surface, almost as if there was another song entirely playing in the background. But in both the novel and the album, it's not just subtle tweaks to the underlying structure that are delivering this constant sense of surprise. There's a very explicit interplay of voices that always seems to be keeping you on your toes. It's traditional for members of Sonic Youth to switch off on lead vocal duties from track to track, but in the opening song of the album, this shift comes much more immediately, as Kim Gordon's sort of whispery, new agey vocals, spirit desire, spirit desire, spirit desire, we will fall, are abruptly followed up with Thurston Moore's kind of conventional ballad of rock and roll heroism. Everybody's looking at the stormy weather, nothing left to do but to work out whether it's true. Near to the Wild Heart also uses these sudden shifts in perspective to great effect, as Joanna confronts her husband's mistress will suddenly leap over into the other woman's frame of consciousness, giving us sudden insight into how she views Joanna, why she's made certain assumptions about her relationship with her lover, just to sort of switch up to throw a wrench in the works of a narrative that already seemed to be hurtling out of control. This play with perspective also comes in the quieter moments of the novel. In the first few pages of the novel, Joanna is desperately vying for her father's attention, improvising poems about the mundane, natural world around her, a process which in her mind seems to imbue these observations with deep philosophical significance. She says, "Daddy, I've made up a poem." "What's it called?" "The Sun and I." With only a slight pause, she recited, "The hens in the yard have eaten 2 worms, but I didn't see them." "Well, what do the sun and you have to do with the poem?" She looked at him for a moment. He hadn't understood. "The sun is above the worms, Daddy, and I made up the poem and didn't see the worms." Clever little observations like that, which, the more you think about them, the more sort of unsettled you start to feel as a reader. Those are the things that grab me most about this novel. And like the sprawling Daydream Nation, though I don't deeply enjoy every moment of these works, the overall accumulative effect has made this deep impression on my consciousness that I'll never escape, nor would I want to.